Hi, and welcome to the Cop Out podcast. This is our first episode of a series that we will be recording and posting during the COP30 round of the climate negotiations. I'm Dana Fisher, the director of the Center for Environment, Community, and Equity, and I will be taking you through these conversations. Today, we are extremely lucky to have some amazing changemakers here with us. These folks all have experience doing activism and platforming activism in really innovative ways. So without further ado, I'm going to get us started. And what I thought we would do to begin is just go around the room and everybody take a moment to do a brief introduction. What I'm particularly interested in you're making sure you talk about, though, is introduce yourself. And you all have experience with the youth climate movement. And so maybe you can each talk a little bit about your experience about how you got to where you are today based on that experience. So maybe Ingmar, would you like to start?
Sure. And hello everyone. My name is Ingmar Rentzhog. I'm calling in here from Stockholm just before I'm going to my journey to Berlin. I'm running an organization called We Don't Have Time. We are the world's largest media platform for climate action. So our role is to amplify all kind of action, activism, youth action, business action, all action wherever you find it. Our role is to make sure more people see it, engage with it, and kind of create a wave. I'm very glad to be with you, Jamie, from This Is Zero Hour, because your founder is actually someone that was one of the first climate youth we published on We Don't Have Time. So I followed This Is Zero Hour. I think we kind of founded each organization at the same time. I'm not youth myself longer, but I really believe that the climate crisis, it's really concerns all of us. But the younger you are, the more concerned should you be, and we really need to shape the world for the younger generation and the next generation. So I think it's super important to have the people in the room that is going to live with what we in the old have created. So that's me. I have a lot more to say, but I stop now.
Thank you so much. Jamie, would you like to go next?
Sure. And it's nice to meet you all. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Jamie Minden. I'm 22, so I still consider myself a youth activist. I just graduated from American University in May. And I'm the executive director at Zero Hour. But I've been in the youth climate movement for about almost the last 10 years. I started organizing when I was 13. And my organizing journey through the climate movement has taken me, to organize with probably most of the major climate organizations in the U.S., U.S. Youth Climate Strikes, Fridays for Future, Sunrise. And so I definitely have, experienced a lot of the different corners of the climate movement and have definitely a love for the people in it. And so, I'm super happy to be here today and to learn from you all. And I also, I guess in regards to COP, for some background, I was at the last two COPs, COPs 28 and 29, and then I will be at the second week of COP 30 in Berlin.
Great, Magnolia. It's your turn.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Magnolia Mead. I'm also 22. I grew up in Ithaca, New York, and as a kid became really worried about climate change and also frustrated that we were seeing so little action from government and from the political system. So I spent probably the majority of my high school and college time as a leader in groups like the Sunrise Movement, where I organized with Jamie and also the Campus Climate Network and Zero Hour. And since college have shifted into the pro-democracy space, more so mostly because of my experience advocating and organizing for climate action at the federal and state level in the US, and feeling like I was drawn to trying to build a youth movement to demand a new political system in the US because of my concerns about issues like climate change. So that's a little bit about me, and there I am.
Fabulous. Thank you both. Thank you all so much for providing this background. It's really helpful. So now I want to bring us to today. And the question I really want everybody to focus on here is what you're working on and how do you hope that it will help make a difference in limiting the climate crisis. Now, two of you are planning to fly to Brazil for the COP. So I'm hoping that the two of you who have chosen to make the trip, how you can talk about the decision to travel and what you expect to get out of it, so you'll know that it was worth the carbon, basically. So I guess we can go in the same order, unless if somebody feels like they need to interject, speak up, please. But let's just go in the same order again.
So I can maybe start by explaining what we do today and what we're going to do at COP by giving a short history lesson around what's kind of three phases in the climate crisis that I hope you agree on, and interesting to hear your view on it. When I started We Don't Have Time, I was not a climate activist at all. I was working in the finance industry, helping financial companies, big banks, fund managers, and insurance companies to communicate. But I started to read more and more about climate, and I became so shocked that no one else in the finance, in the business industry here in Sweden, in the Nordic, they didn't have a clue. They didn't understand the topic, and they didn't realize that the climate crisis is not something that's going to happen in the future, but it's happening here and now. So this was 8 years ago. So the first years of We Don't Have Time, when I decided to use all my skills in communication and fun and start We Don't Have Time instead of working in finance, I was very much focusing on getting people to know that we are in a crisis, because people really didn't have a clue. And I happened to stumble across Greta Thunberg, and I was the first person that went to this first very alone school strike. And it was a Swedish thing. It was never meant to be international. But I did an interview in English, and she was surprisingly very well spoken in English. And we shared that to the world, and people just saw what I saw, that is really crazy. This image of one lonely person, one youth, taking the shoulder of the climate crisis, while we and the grown-up are not doing enough. So the first year was very much get people to understand the problem. But after a while, media became very good at pushing this narrative that we are really doomed, and the problem is so big, so it's no meaning to act on it. So that's where the second phase of both We Don't Have Time we're focusing on, but I also believe we're kind of the second phase in the climate crisis, where it's very needed to focus on the solution, show that we have all the solution we need to solve the climate crisis. We just need to implement them. And we will never implement them if our leaders and the general public are not aware of them. So that is something we have been working on for many, many years, and that is making progress, not enough progress, but kind of the trick were to get the leaders, they're doing something, not enough for climate, get them to do more, speed up change. And that kind of what was happening in the climate space until Trump 2.0. Because the difference between Trump 1.0 and 2.0, 1.0, we had a leader, a climate denier, that were not doing anything for the climate, but he was not able to stop the green transition. But in 2.0, the ones that don't want us to change, including Donald Trump and others, they are doing everything they can to stop the green transition, stop the activists, stop the businesses trying to get us out of the fossil fuel society. And one thing they're doing now very much, and it's also spreading not only in US but also in Europe and elsewhere, is to cancel science. Because if you get rid of the facts, it's easier to continue with the oil drilling. And that's why I'm wearing this cap today. This is a campaign we have launched to put the focus on that We need to put science back into central decision making. And the reason why science are current under attack is because the solutions are working. So the special interests are feeling very threatened. So they try to shut down the science. So this is the defense of science. So we have borrowed the communication and maybe repurpose it, and we use ninjutsu to show that science is cool, and we just need to make it back into the center of decision making. So what I'm going to do at COP30, and the way I motivate quite high carbon footprint to fly, I think it's 8,000 kilometers from Stockholm where I am. So I'm not really looking forward to this plane trip. What I'm motivating my footprint to go there is to bring a big media operation where we're helping all the scientists on the ground. We are partnered with many science organizations there. One of the larger is something called the Planetary Science Pavilion. That is for the first time at a COP meeting, there's a pavilion focusing on science. It's kind of absurd that it's the COP30 before that is happening, but it's about time. So my hope and expectation for COP30 is either a big success or a big failure. I want a Paris or a Copenhagen. I don't want anything in between, because if we are either or will help us, because after a failure we can build a success. But of course I really want that we are progressing, but I don't know, we'll see. But I do believe that this COP will really put science into everyone's collective mind and remind them that humanity and civilization without science is not the way we want to become non-science society. So that's my maybe longer answer to your question, Dana.
Well, actually, I mean, I think that was a really great way of contextualizing this. And I actually do want to ask you one quick follow-up question before we continue with Jamie. And that is, I'm a big fan of We Don't Have Time, and that's one of the reasons that I was so excited to have you on. But one of the things that you mention here that I think is a real challenge we're noticing, particularly in the United States, is the way that the media has really shifted away from focusing on the science and talking about climate nearly as much as it was before, certainly even around Kyoto back in the 1990s, but around Paris. And I just wonder if you could briefly talk about ways that you hope that We Don't Have Time and the work that you're going to do to try to platform science and empower scientists who are at the negotiations and the role that science plays, how you think you might be able to help address this, media hole that we're seeing right now around climate coverage.
I think media is operating in their own logic, and it's not that they have moral. Media is often they need to make profit, and it's kind of a group thing. So they are not. If other news stories are telling the climate story in a way, they need to do kind of the same. And we saw that working in for climate when everyone was suddenly covering Greta Thunberg, but that kind of get out of hand. Suddenly all the newspapers were talking about a young girl instead of the climate or something else. So media is playing a very big role in the sense that they are the only ones that can push out information to the ones that don't agree with you. If you go to your social media, when you publish something, you often only reach the ones that knows who you are or agree with your topic. And that will not change anything. You really need to communicate with the ones that are not on board or that are a little bit skeptical. We don't need to communicate with the crazy people, but everyone else. And media is a very enabler for that. And I have so many ideas on how I want to change media, but so one way to do it is to do it. If they don't do it, we do it ourselves. For example, we are going to COP30. We have a TV studio there next to the other TV stations. They are maybe broadcasting in half an hour per day. We are doing it 6-7 hours per day, and we have a different focus. But our reach is still mostly the ones that care about the climate. So we need to get through their channels as well. And the way I think that we can do that, and where we're also working towards, is to help them to understand science, understand the solutions, and give them the right information so they can pick it up and republish it. Because media, they have very limited resources. So if you give them facts, if you give them news stories pre-packaged, so the way that they can easily republish them, they do that. And the other side, the climate denier side, and the commercial side, trying to push you to buy a lot of different things, they know how to do this. So we in the climate and science communities, we need to do the same. We need to use all those tricks to get media to cover our topic and our stories. But there's one very big challenge to achieve that, and that's money. Because in order to do that efficiently, we really need resources. And we know time, we are very limited in resources, and unfortunately, there's not many other resources out there. So in the end, if we're going to be successful getting media to cover this topic in a different way, we need money to do it. And I'm not talking about we, I mean, we in the climate movement, we need to fund it. And it's very hard to find people funding things. Can you say something before I give the mic to my younger panelists here? And that's, we have all read about Bill Gates' recent, he published a text before COP30 saying that we need to climate is important, but it's more important to give poor people money, etc. I think I mean, of course, we should help poor people, but it's not either or. We need to do both, all this. So he's really playing down the urgency in a time where we need to, increase the urgency before a COP meeting. And what not so many people knows about this. If you read the Bill Gates letter, it's a lot of arguments that are very similar a climate denier called Björn Lombard. It's a Danish think tank kind of person that is really, really twisting things to get people to not act on climate. He's not a plain denialist, it's more of a delay, because you can't deny this anymore. And what just were disclosed is an article in DSMOG where they have found out that Bill Gates have funded Björn Lombard with $3.5 million. So this is it. The good side, we that need the resources, we are not getting the resources from the billionaires because they are protecting themselves. So we need to crowdfund our action from people to help people.
Thank you so much. So actually, as we go around now, and so Jamie's going to talk next. And so I had my question, but I'm going to just add a little more for what I was hoping you could touch on here because of some of the points that Ingmar made. And that is, I'm hoping that you can talk a little bit about how your organization, the work you're doing, is trying to bust through these echo chambers that Ingmar was talking about, and how you may very well be pushing back to the technocrats and the billionaires like Bill Gates. Go ahead, Jamie.
Great question. Love to hear it. So I'll just talk a little bit briefly about Zero Hour's current campaigns to kind of set the scene for what we'll be doing at COP. So we are a climate justice organization, and our, one of our main core tenets is fighting the fossil fuel industry to the highest efficacy we can. And so our campaigns are kind of designed around targeting the biggest, polluters, or having the biggest impact on the fossil fuel industry as we can. So one of our campaigns is around fossil fuel subsidies and bringing about an end to fossil fuel subsidies. There was a study done in, I believe, 2021 by the Stockholm Institute that found that 50 to 60% of new fossil fuel projects would be economically unviable without public funding from fossil fuel subsidies. And so that's a great deal of power that we as a people can take back from the fossil fuel industry and really reduce the build out of fossil fuels that we're seeing, particularly right now as the Trump administration has essentially almost doubled fossil fuel subsidies in his first year back in office in the U.S. So that is one of our main campaigns. And actually last year at COP, we almost made some really great progress on that fight. We were unexpectedly welcomed by Oil Change International, an incredible organization, to work with them on the Exim trade deal to end $41 billion in oil and gas financing. There was a deal within the OECD that several countries had signed on to, and the US was one of the final holdouts. And we were able to we had been hearing that, a youth pressure on lever kind of being used in those final moments of negotiations around the deal would be useful to pressure the Biden administration, as Biden was, hoping to cement his climate legacy, as he said. So we at 0 Hour and a couple of other youth orgs worked together to really hammer in that final push. Our 0 Hour organizers were able to put together a letter, and within 24 hours got like 65 signatories. We met with congressional members, met with the State Department, spoke at press conferences, and that final youth push we heard was enough to push the Biden administration over the line and get them to sign on to ending that $41 billion in fossil fuel financing globally for oil and gas. And the great thing about the deal is it would have been Trump-proof. It would have stopped that money from being used by the Trump administration. Unfortunately, South Korea and Turkey did not sign on in time before the Trump administration, the second one, took office, unfortunately. So that did not go through, but that's kind of part of, you mentioned, or you asked Dana about what justifies the carbon for that climate for the flight to go to COP, and that's definitely that experience is something that was part of my calculation this year, in the hopes that maybe we could have impact negotiations and maybe a similar level potentially. Our second campaign at 0 Hour that we're mainly focusing on in the U.S. is, and actually outside of the U.S. as well, is the fight against liquefied natural gas. Liquefied natural gas is one of the biggest carbon bombs globally. The industry is being built out by the United States right now, and it is the effects are massive. There was a study done by a researcher, the Howarth study, that showed that liquefied natural gas is significantly more warming potential for the environment than coal even. And the Trump administration is significantly pressuring countries to import U.S. liquefied natural gas, and also pressuring for the rapid build out of liquefied natural gas facilities. And these new U.S. facilities would push us over all of our climate targets, like these facilities alone. And so we're involved in that fight as well. At COP, I will personally also be focusing on a couple of other site fights, including the East Africa crude oil pipeline, and efforts for with indigenous solidarity, in the Amazon, particularly around the Don't Gas the South campaign. So there's a couple of campaigns that are around natural gas build out in the Don't Gas Africa campaign, Don't Gas Asia, and Don't Gas the Amazon. So I'll be working to the best of my ability there. And then we have a couple of other folks in the 0 Hour delegation that are doing some really great work I want to shout out. We have Von Michael Tobes, who was our 0 Hour Philippines director. He'll be attending. And he was involved in the first drafting of the Just Transition Framework from the Philippines. And he's also one of the leads of the youth constituency of the Plastics Treaty. So he's been really integral in fighting for a plastics treaty, and fighting the petrochemical industry on that level. And then one of our other organizers, Coco Marnef, is going to be at COP she's at COI actually right now. And she's doing a lot of really great work, bringing together youth from around the world in advocacy negotiations, pressuring on like a U.S. congressional and mayoral side in particular right now, but also working with folks in El-Khoi and Yungo to bring together the youth constituency at COP. And to your other question about busting through echo chambers and how we're pushing back against these technocrats, I mean, that's a tough question. A lot of my work at this COP will be particularly sort of like the outside game, like a lot of I'm going to be working on a lot of actions at COP this year, to the best of my ability, especially because the U.S. Participation in negotiations is gonna look very different this year. So we are planning a series of protests at COP, and you know, I mean, we try to call out these technocratic narratives in every press conference and every, you know, negotiation room we enter, of course. I believe at a press conference last year, I, you know, spoke out against Elon Musk. But these I think these protests are probably the best answer I have to your question, Dana. But this year protesting does look different. I'm sure we'll get later into the kind of faults that in the UNFCCC system, but I'm hearing from my colleagues in that are helping put on these actions, that we have significant limits to free speech that have within the UNFCCC that have increased even this year in regards to action planning. We've for the last few years not been able to reference specific country names in protests at COP, like within the venue. But now this year the UNFCCC has announced we're not allowed to list currencies. We're not allowed to name and shame is kind of what the category they put this under, but we're not allowed to now reference specific current global conflicts or wars, and some words have been banned, including genocide and siege, which is, we believe, you know, in reference to, many ongoing conflicts and genocides that are going on right now, but in particular the genocide of the Palestinian people. And so we will be pushing back against these policies. There's a protest planned, I believe, for the 12th of November. I won't be there, but some of my colleagues will, calling this out. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
That does. I'm going to ask you one quick follow-up as well before we turn to Magnolia. And the question I have relates to what you mentioned. So we know that the Trump administration is not sending any senior officials to the negotiations, right? And the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, that's the UNFCCC, which you had mentioned, has basically pushed back against the transparency and engagement that it used to have. I mean, you know, when I originally started studying the climate negotiations back in the 1990s, the climate regime was one of the most transparent and open of the international regimes that existed out of the UN system. So it's really dismaying, I'll use that word, to see the way that folks with, you know, privileged access and power and resources have been able to shift and change this UN framework and this UN process, right? So what I'm wondering for you, if you could talk for a moment about, you know, you mentioned the international coalition that you're part of, and you also talked about working as an outsider. So I'm just going to ask you point blank, I mean, are you guys thinking about potentially, you know, using your platform at COP to go against some of these policies to draw some attention to the inequalities that we're going to see there? I mean, we can expect those, right, already.
Oh, absolutely. Just to clarify, do you mean inequalities within COP or within the U.S. delegation?
No, I mean, it's not even worth talking about the U.S. delegation. It's going to be it's going to be a nothing burger, and anybody who goes has no power. So I mean, honestly, I think anybody who spends any time trying to lobby whoever's there, they're there because they have no power by definition. So forget that part. I'm saying, like, within the system, in terms of, you know, all eyes will be on Brazil, and, you know, hopefully thanks to Ingmar and his team, more people will be able to see more because they're going to be providing, and I can't not say it because my son would be upset if I didn't say 6 to 7 hours a day, right, of coverage. So I think given that, the question is, you know, how do you get into that coverage, and, you know, how do you call out these inequalities that are built into the UN system now that weren't necessarily there when the whole regime was begun? That's the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think you know, I mean, as I mentioned, we will be planning these actions and hoping to get press attention, coverage of those inequalities in these actions. Another thing that I believe will be protested is the record number of fossil fuel lobbyists in attendance of COP. Last year at COP29 in Azerbaijan, there was a record number of over 1,700 fossil fuel lobbyists, which outnumbered most delegations of almost every country and outnumbered the delegations of 10 most climate vulnerable nations combined. So that will definitely be something we're calling attention to. And yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we have a whole protest planned for the beginning of the first week, specifically around these restrictions within the UNFCCC and the unfairness in the system. Another organization that I am working with, that we're part of their coalition, is called the Angry Coalition. It's an acronym. Angry spells an acronym. And one of the core tenets of what they'll be doing at COP, amongst other things regarding like demilitarization and false solutions, is trying to bring the demands of the People's COP into the blue zone, into the COP space, that is more restrictive, because as we know, the COP space, the COP negotiations are extremely, extremely limited. You know, a lot of people from most affected countries and most affected areas have significant barriers to entry. And so the goal of the Angry Coalition at this COP, or one of their great goals, is to really spend a lot of time getting to know what people's demands are at the People's COP, and then bringing them into the negotiation space and kind of highlighting what isn't in the room and what should be. And so I will definitely be aiding in that effort to the best of my ability.
Thank you so much. So we're now going to turn to Magnolia. And Magnolia, just to add a little bit to what I want you to talk about, is I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about the decisions that you and your group has made with regard to where the most opportunity is to press for change, and how that came about and what you hope to get out of it.
So I have never been to COP before, and I think the main reason for that is when I was involved in Sunrise Movement and with Zero Hour, mostly in college, I focused all my efforts on trying to pass climate legislation at the national level in the US, focusing on domestic policy efforts. The reason I was drawn to that work in the first place was when I was a kid, I learned from a pretty early age about climate change, and I saw not only how it was affecting the place where I come from in upstate New York, but also how it was affecting other countries, especially countries in South America, or in South and Central America, where part of my family is from. And I became really angry about the fact that the US is the largest polluter per capita in the world, and that it was causing these horrible effects in other countries that had not contributed as much or at all to the climate crisis. And so I thought that the biggest thing that I could do as a person growing up in the US was to use all my leverage and power here to try to get us to cut our emissions. So that's why I decided to join Sunrise. And in my first year of college, I became really involved in trying to pass the Build Back Better Act, President Biden's climate agenda. And I saw firsthand what it was like for a social movement in the US to actually get enough power to put something like the biggest, most impactful climate agenda ever in the center of national politics. And I also remember I remember the day that the bill failed. I was actually with Jamie right outside the Capitol, and we heard that one senator was going to vote against the bill and effectively kill a piece of legislation that was supported by a vast majority of Americans, the President of the United States, so many people, and just feeling like so hopeless about our political system because of that moment. After that, I stayed involved in the climate movement in other ways, but recently I've turned towards pro-democracy work, and trying to build youth support for demanding reforms or radical changes to our political system, because we've seen that it's failed to deliver things not only to address the climate crisis, but on a vast variety of crises that Americans are facing right now. And so I feel like right now, the thing, again, that I can do that will have the most impact is to try to build a new democracy that one in which people feel like they can have agency over their their lives and over these crises, and also so that we can have a political system where we can address the climate crisis so that other countries don't feel the brunt of the effects of our country. So I think that's a big reason why I'm not going to COP and why I haven't gone before, but I'm really glad that people like Jamie are going.
Thank you. I want to ask you one quick follow-up question, Magnolia, before we move to my next question. And that is, so some of the challenges and experiences that you describe, although they are obviously specific to the US case and what we've experienced here in the United States over the past, let's call it 8 years, right? In a lot of ways, people in other parts of the world and other countries, I mean, there are a number of countries in Europe that have been experiencing and fighting against, right-leaning populism, for better or for worse, depending on the country. I'm wondering if you've thought at all about or connected at all with youth and youth organizers in other countries to think about how you might coordinate or consolidate the kind of work you're doing, or at least, exchange ideas. And if you've done that, tell us a little bit about how that's been going.
I think we have a lot to learn from other contexts outside the US in terms of how countries have democratized. We actually haven't been working with other activists in other countries, but I think that's a great idea, because other countries have faced the same problems that we're facing right now in the US with authoritarianism and a radical far right that's taken over the levers of power in our government. But when lots of other countries have faced these issues and they democratized further. They passed constitutional amendments, they reformed their governments, they abolished their Senate-like chambers or systems like the Electoral College. And so I think we have a lot to learn from those contexts as organizers and people in the US, especially because in the US right now, not only is we're actually undergoing a constitutional revolution without kind of knowing it. Our president is undermining a lot of institutions. At the same time, Americans have this view of institutions like the Constitution as not being able to be like changeable. And we need to actually see those institutions as ones that we can remake as a democracy in order to have a better democracy, so that we don't have to just answer to an authoritarian making false promises. I think that we need to look at our democratic system as one in which we have a broad coalition of people that need to come together to build a new democracy, so that we can feel like we can actually have agency over our way of life and be able to build with each other to make change that comes from the bottom, not from the top. So yeah, I think we have a lot to learn by connecting with activists and other democracies and what they've been able to do. So I think that's something we'll try to pursue.
Great. I'll just say, I think that it's really important. While, Donald Trump is one person, he is absolutely empowered by, well, let's see, all the folks who wrote Project 2025, but then also all the Republicans in the Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives that have basically given him carte blanche to step all over the Constitution without any recourse. He could be held accountable right now, but he's not. So that's one of the reasons I think that the work that you and your team are all doing, Magnolia, is so important right now, especially so that young people recognize the ways that there are levers that can be pushed. But if folks listen in who are interested in working on these issues in other countries, I would encourage everybody to get together and talk about this, because I think we're all stronger when we are all together. And hopefully Magnolia will come back, because I know she was having some technology problems. But we're going to move on to the next question. And the next question is, if we can all think about the future now. And what I'm particularly interested in your talking about is, what is your vision for the future in terms of what do you think we're going to get out? I mean, both of you are going to COP. What do you hope to get out of going to COP? What is the ideal outcome for you? And, I know that the ideal outcome from the world is to stop climate change, so we don't really need to go there. But for you specifically, how will you know if you're successful? And given, we can have hopes, but we also know there's reality. What do you expect versus what do you hope for? If you can talk about both of those sides. And maybe Ingmar, you want to go first again?
Like I said before, what I hope, not hope, but what I see we can say hope, but I don't. I'm feeling split about it. I hope for a new Paris breakthrough or a Copenhagen failure. And my role in it is not. I mean, I can change the outcome. So that is for the leaders in the negotiations. But my role in it is to amplify science so that the world will know if we have a breakthrough, it's because science. It's because we're respecting the science and the facts. If we have a failure, it's because we are ignoring and disrespecting science. And if we can achieve one of those scenarios, that will lead to positive change. I mean, a breakthrough will, of course, lead to positive change. But getting people to understand that we have some crazy idiots with so much money and power that are working against science, the fundament of our society, not only climate, but, fight disease, creating cool stuff, have a thriving society. We have some people that are not respecting that, not following it. And I want to, the emperor is naked. I want the people to see that so that we can dismantle their power. So that is what I hope that will happen. What I'm afraid of that can happen is that it's just, the war just continue. We don't cut through the noise. We get another COP30, like some pledges meaningless, and the world moves on and talk about some scandal on TikTok or something. So that's my fear.
Great. Before we move on from you, one follow-up question is just so I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about it is, I think we're probably more likely to see a Copenhagen style outcome rather than a Paris style outcome, given the groundwork that's been laid. So I don't mean to be, I am an apocalyptic optimist, so I have to expect the worst in some ways, but hope for the best. But what I would just ask you is, have you done anything to prepare for if there is failure? Is there a specific way that you think you can capitalize and help use that failure to get us to push for more social change that we need to address the climate crisis? Have you all thought about that at all? Or is that in the works as things happen?
I would say it's very hard to plan things. You need to go by the air and kind of as a media capture what's happening and get the narrative out when you know how things are playing. So it's hard to have a plan before. And of course, I don't hope that everything will break down and it will be a disaster. But I think this, regardless any scenario, I think this COP will be not a meaningless COP because I think it will be an important COP either way. But I don't think the COP will solve the climate crisis in the end either. But I do believe that COP is very important because if we don't have a meeting to criticize, we don't even have this on the agenda at all. And regarding kind of the exclusiveness to go to be able to come to a COP, I mean, first it's cost enormous amount of money to go to this COP specifically. It's actually more expensive to come to this COP compared to World Economic Forum in Davos. And that's a very elite event. So this is more expensive. That's, I don't know. It's not really, I don't like that. But even if we have a COP in a city where people can easily travel to, it's very hard for someone to get, accreditation from UN in the blue zone and such. And therefore, I see that we are helping with this because we are beaming in people in the discussion, in the meeting, with the people participating in the meeting. So for one example, in Baku, the leading scientist, Johan Rockström, he didn't want to go to COP29 because he was criticizing the meeting, but he still was participating through us in that meeting. He's coming now to Berlin, but that is also a role we as a media and not traditional media, but a little bit more creative media can play.
Great, Jamie. Tell us what you're hoping for and what you expect.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to get my hopes up too much, to be honest with you. COP is COP is a difficult week. The last few years I've been. So I'm trying to, have set high goals, but be emotionally prepared, I guess, for the outcome that could occur. I do really hope that there is, ideally, a breakthrough in negotiations. I think the G77 in particular have had a great deal of success the last few COPs at negotiating for stronger climate reparations, loss and damage framework. And for more progress, and to give a little context, the G77 are it's sort of like the G7, but it's a contingency of low and middle income countries that are particularly vulnerable to the climate crisis or higher impacted. And so I have hope in the work that they have been doing in the last few years. And in regards to the negotiations. But part of the reason that I'm more focused in particular on certain issue areas such as liquefied natural gas or fossil fuel subsidies at COP is because I see it as a space to make progress on those particular demands, or at least try to stop worse outcomes in those particular issue areas. Like, for example, I mean, unfortunately, and honestly, it's criminal, but COP has been historically in recent years a space for fossil fuel deals to be made. And so trying to, do what I can to make that as difficult as possible for the people, the lobbyists and the governments who come into this space with that intention, I think is also part of my goal. That's probably a really cynical way to think about it, but unfortunately, that's the reality we live in. Part of my calculation of going into COP, despite the the emissions and things like that, is that if I am very privileged to have this opportunity to attend COP, and but if I were not there, it just might mean that one more fossil fuel lobbyist is able to be there, right? That's kind of the way I've been thinking about it. I'm not sure if that's the best rationale, but that's sort of the way I'm thinking about it. So I see issue areas as personally part of my focus. But I do really hope for a better outcome with the negotiations this year and a breakthrough, because we are on the knife's edge of unmitigating climate disaster. And so,
yeah, I would just say I think it's really important to bring up the loss and damage and the funding for it, which was approved during the last round of the climate negotiations. Everybody celebrated it. However, the funding has not actually shown up. And it's that difference between policy making and implementation on a financial level. And so one of the things I really hope that you are able to do while you're visiting in Brazil is draw as much attention as you can to the places where the regime has not followed through with its promises and the ways that it has basically failed to live up to expectations, because I think that is one of the best ways to platform activism and platform the less privileged voices, those people who are privileged enough to go. And I just, the amount of funding that was required to attend COP this year, as Ingmar mentioned, it's unfathomable. It's outrageous. And, as someone who has chosen intentionally not to attend since Paris, I have to say the idea that every year it gets more expensive and every year you have more fossil fuel lobbyists, and OPEC has a larger and larger pavilion, which it never used to be able to show up and basically hang up a sign. It just becomes, it's a farce. So I hope you all can go down there and help to draw attention to that as much as you can. And we're going to turn finally to Magnolia. Thank you. Welcome back. I'm sorry you've been having technology issues, but I'm so glad you're back. So you get the last word on thinking about what you hope for from this round of negotiations and what you expect to see, Magnolia, and particularly because you're working more on the ground, how that will feed into the work that you're doing and what you plan to be doing in your work with party crashers.
Yeah, what I hope to see from COP this year is I hope to see, I'm excited to see people like Jamie going and using the tactics that we know have worked to expose injustice historically, to expose all the things that are so wrong about COP, expose the fact that some voices are upheld more highly because they have more money, and I think that there's a big opportunity to do that. And so I'm really glad that people like Jamie are going and going to be able to shed light on that. For me, I'm excited to keep playing my role and trying to win political change in the U.S. in a country that has so much power and really could be a leader on climate change, and actually be coming to these COPs, committing to the emissions reductions goals that it has set. It could be, yeah, really being a real leader in that, but we're not able to do that. And I think a big reason is because our democratic institutions are just not functioning, and not serving the will of the people. And so I'm excited to be able to keep playing my role so that we can get climate justice in the US and so much other things that we need, so that we have a political system where you don't have to pay to play, where politicians in power aren't just answering to their donors, where we can have more parties that represent our diverse viewpoints and identities, and where people can actually see their concerns represented in government, and so that we can address the role that our country has played in the climate crisis.
Well, that's a wonderful place to end. So thank you all for coming on the first of the series of Cop Out conversations that we're going to be having in the next 2 weeks during the COP30 round of the negotiations. Our next episode is focusing on maladaptation and climate shocks with we have a number of scientists who are signed up to join and folks who are working as change makers to try to actually implement the changes we need to address the climate crisis. So please stay tuned and thank you so much.